Well, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us this evening for Lupus Canada's Self-Advocacy webinar. It will be an interview format, so a little bit different than some of our past webinars. Before we begin, I'd like to note that all attendees are placed in listen-only mode. And should you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we will do our best to get to that at the end of the interview. This evening, we're pleased to have Abby Charles joining us. Abby is a lupus warrior and who serves as the director at the Institute of Public Health Innovation, the Public Health Institute for Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. Abby, welcome. Would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Leanne. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be chatting tonight with Lupus Canada and looking forward to our discussion. Like you said, I'm Abby Charles and I work in public health, and I really, have been involved in public health since about 2006. I'm also a dancer and an entrepreneur. I own a fashion brand in Trinidad and Tobago called Bene Carib, and I am the creative director and designer for that brand as well. And yeah, so like I said, I'm a dancer too. So I've been dancing since I was a tiny little baby, and I still love dancing in my free time. And as you mentioned, I've been experiencing lupus panniculitis since 2008. Which is a different form of lupus whereby my body cells attack my fat cells. So it is a form of lupus profundus. And it's been quite a journey learning to live with and become a self-advocate, which is what we're talking about tonight, how to advocate for yourself and some of those tips that I've learned over the years as I've been living with this disease.
Great. You're definitely a very busy person, and it's wonderful to hear about all the different things you're doing. I think you're next. You wanted to share. Were you going to share your video with us?
I definitely was. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my self-advocacy journey too, because I haven't always been very open and public about living with lupus. But telling my story has been a key part of self-advocacy for me. So I thought it would be a great way to start this discussion by sharing a little bit about who I am through this first time that I told my story to a video. And just to give some context, when this video aired for the first time on Facebook, I was in shock by how many views it had. Like it's almost like this video went viral. There were over 30,000 views, and just a lot of discussion and questions in the comments. So really, this video served as a space for people to get more information about living with this disease, which I never imagined would have been how wide and far it would have gotten. So I'm just going to stop my slides and pull up the video.
Great.
So in 2008, I developed a lump in my cheek, which was really interesting. I had a growth. It started off as something that you might think was like a pimple, very small, but it was underneath the surface of my skin. And then over time, it kept growing. So I was going to the dermatologist. She gave me some steroid creams. She thought it might have been a cyst that had developed. And, over time, she was trying to figure out what is this, because these steroid creams, it wasn't going down. It definitely was not a pimple. So she sent me to do a biopsy. And the results from the biopsy came back. They said that there was panniculitis, which of course I didn't know what that meant. But panniculitis essentially is when the fat in your face gets eaten, essentially. So I don't know if you could see that I have a sink in my cheek. One of my cheeks is a little narrower than the other, and that's because where the lump was actually my white blood cells were there like attacking my fat, so it caused inflammation, and that's what was causing the lump. So I had to go on steroids for a while, and once I went on steroids, that's when the sink came, because there were no more white blood cells, there was no more inflammation. So at that time, I was told that it's a form of panniculitis, but I wasn't really told that that I had lupus per se. I was put on steroids for some time, it went down, and that was about it. And then again, I want to say maybe in 2011, I started to have some inflammation on my face, like right in the center of my face near my nose. And my eyes started to swell up. I guess I wish I could show you pictures, but I started to notice that my nose was just getting really, really large on my face. I had swelling here. A lot of my friends didn't really notice anything, but I did. So I went to the dermatologist again, and she was like, you know, you don't know what it is. Let me give you some topical creams. And then she asked, you know, have I ever sent you for a lupus panel? And I said no. So she sent me for a lupus panel. And when I went to the rheumatologist to assess the lupus panel, what he said was that I had super high anti-nuclear antibodies. And what anti-nuclear antibodies are, those are white blood cells that attack your own body cells. So that was the trigger for my form of lupus. Even though I didn't have many of the other signs of what's called systemic lupus, I had the signs of lupus panniculitis. So that's how I found out that I had lupus. I have a very specific type of lupus. It's called lupus panniculitis. I still have to go to get checked on a regular basis. Every 6 months, I have to get my lupus panels done because about 20% of people who have lupus panniculitis can develop systemic lupus. So you want to continue to maintain checks on a regular basis for that, so that if you do move into systemic lupus, you can make sure that you're being treated appropriately.
All right. So yeah, I thought it would be helpful to show that video. As much as I am and did at this time, this was in 2018 when we filmed this, and we launched it in 2019. I don't think you could tell how nervous I was sharing that story. So yeah, that's a little bit about the background of how I found out that I had lupus. And since then, it's funny how things come full circle, because I started with my left cheek being inflamed, and I have a sink in my left cheek, and now my right cheek is inflamed. So just constantly dealing with the inflammation and disfigurement that comes with lupus panniculitis.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you for sharing that video. That's truly amazing to hear how many views that received, and that is awareness for this disease. What does self-advocacy mean to you, and why is it important to you?
Gosh, so, self-advocacy to me is really raising awareness of an issue that affects me, and working together or collaboratively with the people around me to ensure that I am benefiting, so that there's a positive change, and we work together to find solutions to address that issue. So for example, as I just talked about the fact that my cheek is swelling right now, self-advocacy for me means that I need to be on top of figuring out what's going on and how do I fix this. I've been on steroids, I want to say 3 times in the last less than 6 months to try to address this. And every time I taper off, it comes right back. So I'm constantly trying to think of, all right, which doctors do I go to next, for us to think about what are some possible things that we could try next to get rid of this. Because I know what the long-term impact is going to be on my body. So I feel like I have to advocate. Self-advocacy also for me means sharing my story. And through sharing my story with others, it has truly been a benefit to me, because not only am I learning more about my disease, but I'm also creating awareness with others, so that they themselves can support me as I'm living with lupus, and support others in their lives as well. One of the key things about self-advocacy that I've found is that I have to be a self-advocate with myself, because I'm one of those people who doesn't know how to say no to things. But living with an autoimmune disease, I'm sure many people know that you can get very tired easily, and stress management is a key part of managing an autoimmune disease. So I have to be a self-advocate with myself and tell myself, no, Abby, calm down, say no, fairly often.
Yep. We all run into those challenges, and you have to really absolutely be your own best self-advocate.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The other piece, I think, is why is advocacy important to me, right? And what I've found is that through advocacy, there's a number of things that I have benefited from, and I want to share those just so that for anyone who might not be comfortable either sharing their story or really speaking up for themselves, they might find that these benefits might also give them a little push towards, or motivation towards, considering opening up their voices and speaking up for themselves. So through self-advocacy, it's the best way for me to ensure my best care. Like I was just talking about, nobody else knows what's going on in your body. Nobody else. So by me speaking up about what's going on with me while I'm in my house, isolated during COVID-19, I have to speak up. I have to pick up the phone and call my doctor if I notice anything going on in my body. And it's the one way for me to ensure my best care. Because of paniculitis, it's one of those diseases that the minute we get inflamed, that means that there's a potential that I could get seriously disfigured physically. So the speed with which I should be getting treatment is fairly quick. So through advocating for myself, I've been able to get efficient and accurate care with my general practitioner, my rheumatologist, and my dermatologist, because they all make up the team. I've also gotten access to the treatments that I need, because, not every doctor that I go to is trained in lupus or is really knowledgeable about lupus. So I have to be speaking up like, well, the last doctor I went to, here's what the regimen he had me on. Could you consider or look at this and think about what that might mean? I've gone to doctors, and while they're in the appointment, they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be, what this is. I'll be right back. And they literally go check the computer and then come back and have a discussion with me. And I'm like, yeah, I could have told you that. That's what my last doctor said. So having that knowledge has helped me to make sure that I'm getting the treatments that I need. And, as well, there are some treatments that I should be taking that are no longer accessible in the US, for example, that I at one point had access to. So advocating is going to be something that I need to do to be able to access those treatments, right? Not just advocating with my doctors, but also considering going to Lupus Foundation of America, going to other legislators to think about what will it take for us to get access to these medications in this country. And then funding for research, because as much as there is little research for lupus in general, there's even less out there for lupus paniculitis. So I want to make sure that I'm creating a voice and creating space for research for this disease as well. Flexibility and support at work is huge, because work could be stressful. Like I said, I work full time and I have a business. So finding as much time for me to rest, or, if I have a flare up, so that my coworkers, my employer, that they are understanding of my needs has been really important. So I am very open and comfortable sharing with them, because that only benefits me as well and my health. Ensuring, the other piece related to that is that my insurance is through my employment, which might be a little bit different to how things work in Canada, but ensuring that the insurance plans that they offer also are factored in and don't cost me a ton of money to pay for treatments, etc., is also something that's important. Support from family and friends is big. My mom is one of my biggest supporters. My family really, really support me with this disease. So being able to share and being open about living with lupus with my family, friends, has just expanded the amount of support that I have. And like I said, I don't really say no very well. So having my family support to help them say, Abby, you're really taking on another project. How about you slow down? Has been really, really, really important. And, I'll say through sharing my story, one of the greatest joys is, one, being able to help others. But I've had so many people reach out to me like, I'm living with lupus as well, or I have this autoimmune disease. And it's expanded my support network while I'm also able to help other people who are living with this disease. Sometimes just to be frustrated together, having that support has been really important. So those peer networks, self-advocacy has connected me to more people. My trainer, I have a physical trainer. I got one during COVID because if I don't have a personal trainer, I'm not going to exercise. But there's specific types of exercise that works better for people with autoimmune disease. And I learned that just through reading and doing research that, you know, over pumping my body and over excessive exercise may not be the best. So I had to advocate with them too. I was like, you know what? How about you start reading? Could you read some of these articles? Because I don't know that this exercise and me running every day is necessarily the best type of exercise for my body. So I've been able to work together to really customize my exercise and fitness. And lastly, stress management. All of these pieces just tie together, but advocacy is really important for me so that I can manage stress in my life, right? So sharing my story, advocating for my own health has been so important for me, finding that time and space to really deal with the stress.
Yeah, that's a great information and great sharing. And I think having the support from both your coworkers, your employers, and your family and friends is really critical to your overall health. And I like that you talk about, you know, when you're looking at exercise, and again, you have to advocate for yourself. We expect everybody to know everything, but they don't always know exactly how it's going to impact someone living with an autoimmune disease like lupus. So we have to inform them, just as sometimes we have to inform doctors, and we have to always, you know, be able to provide that information.
Definitely.
Well, Abby, I first learned about you from your TED Talk on the importance of peers, like we're talking about, and lived experience in our health and other systems. What inspired you to share your story or your lupus journey on such a platform?
Gosh, I don't even know that I was necessarily inspired, but you know, the presenters at TEDx Port of Spain, the people who put that event on, they came to me, and the TED event was happening in October, and they came to me in September and said, you know, Abby, you were nominated to do this TED Talk. We'd love to have you do this. And give us 2 days, because all the other speakers had found out about this a long time before. They had found out in March of that year. I had found out in September. So they said, give us 2 days, let us know if you'd be interested in doing this, because what this will require is you coming up with a talk and having that essentially done in about a week and a half.
Wow.
So because of the quick turnaround, I had to think about what type of topic could I talk about that speaks to fearlessness without saying the word fearlessness, and that also matters to me. And the one thing I could think about was, one, why we need more people who have health issues, who live the experiences in our health system, to be employed in and be a part of our health system. And I gave the story of me learning about living with lupus and not necessarily having someone who I could talk to readily or talk to easily about what it means to be living with this type of disease. And why it's so important for us to begin to employ, not just have volunteers or peers as volunteers, but really think about what will it take for our health systems to pay for and integrate peers into people with lived experience into our health systems. So that if I were, you know, diagnosed with lupus for the first time, someone who is also living with lupus, and ideally who also has living lupus paniculitis, would be part of their team. So the doctor would say, you know what, I know this is new for you. Would you like to talk with someone on our team who also knows what this experience is like? Because that's the type of work that I do as we're dealing with HIV, chronic disease, diabetes. And I just feel like there also needs to be this type of role integrated for lupus as well. And I know Lupus Canada has peer networks across the country, but wouldn't it be great if you also had funding to pay people, especially since for lupus, there's so many people who can't necessarily work full time because of, this disease. But if they could be paid, right, to support someone through their words, through their expertise of living with this disease, that could be really amazing. So, it wasn't necessarily that I was inspired to give the talk, but it was out of necessity, right? Because I'm so passionate about living with this disease, ensuring that I share the message, but also thinking about how could we change our health systems to better support people with lupus and people with every disease as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot when people are first diagnosed with lupus, they're very scared because there's a lot of information out there, and they want answers. And our job is to provide that hope, that there is hope, that they can live well with it, but to have someone who has been living with it and can really speak to it. And we do that through various different channels. But you're right, to have someone that, is able to do that and able to have the funding to do that. I think that's an amazing thing and would be highly beneficial to someone who is early in their diagnosis.
Yeah. And even, I remember talking to someone just recently because one of my friends found out that she had lupus and referred her to talk to me. And the first question she said, she was like, because in Trinidad and Tobago, we have Carnival, and you all know Caribana. So we have Carnival, and you're in the sun. So the first question she said was like, is it true that you can't be in the sun? Like, what does that mean for your life? How do you live if you can't play Carnival, if you can't go as a Trinidadian, if you can't do these things? But those questions are real, right? They're real fears that people have that can affect their lives. So sharing my story was important to me so that I can also be that connection for other people as well.
Absolutely. And you've said to me before that telling your story is such a powerful self-advocacy tool, like you're saying here today, because it's not just sharing your story, but it's really helping to create that awareness and to show people that there's hope and hopefully enhance the healthcare system as well.
Listen, and right now with COVID too, I find myself having to advocate all the time for myself. Because, I wear my mask everywhere I go. We are fairly open, and the mask mandate has been, relaxed significantly. So people are indoors, not wearing masks as long as they're vaccinated. And I'm vaccinated, but I'm still wearing my mask. But a lot of people are like, why are you wearing a mask? Why? So I always have to be advocating for, I'm like, there's people who have autoimmune disease. I have lupus, leave me alone. So it's a constant piece that you have to advocate for yourself. At the beginning of COVID, I was on Instagram, on my stories, just reminding people as I'm getting my infusions I take Remicade once every 2 months. There's a reason why we want people to wear masks, because there are people who have autoimmune weaknesses out here that you don't know.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that constant advocacy is essential.
Exactly. What would you say were some of the steps you took to begin advocating for yourself? We've touched on a few of them. And what did you need to advocate with? How can we help other people start that process and start that journey?
Yeah, well, I have a slide developed for that too. Here are some of these steps that I would recommend for anyone who is interested in starting to speak up for themselves. Information is your greatest resource. So learning about your disease and really having information at the tip of your fingers is to your benefit, right? When I was first diagnosed in 2008, I do not remember Google being so prevalent everywhere, right? But now you have these wonderful cell phones, so you always have information at the tip of your fingers, but not just looking up the information, but really get into a place where you know the information and that you're using validated resources to get that information, right? So Google pulls up so much information from everywhere, but you have a resource here in Lupus Canada And Lupus Canada has an amazing set of resources on their website, categorized by research, all sorts of different categories that you could take a look at to begin to really understand what's happening in my body. And if you have challenges with understanding some of the information, which might come at a level, for some people, that might be a higher reading level than you are capable of, connecting with a peer or calling Lupus Canada for advice or tips on that, how to address that based on their information, could be really beneficial. But really understand your treatment options, learn more about lupus in general. What research is out there? What new research is happening? Are there any clinical trials that are happening related to lupus that you could learn more about? The Lupus Canada website, like I said, has that list of resources to take a look at, but information is your number one tool. And here's why. Because when you go into your doctor's office, like I said, there might be those doctors who were not trained in lupus, who are not rheumatologists. And, you know, with lupus, often you have a multidisciplinary team. So you have your general practitioner who is not a lupus expert. You have your rheumatologist who may have seen many more people with lupus. I have a dermatologist because my lupus is of the skin, and my dermatologist has not dealt with lupus. But when I look up dermatologists in DC who have lupus expertise,
yes,
how many are there, right? So I have to have the information so that when I go into those appointments, I am tooled with what I need. If they don't know what they're talking about, I can share information for them to go do more research on. Or I could encourage them and provide them with as much information. Or if they're telling me something that sounds a little off, I can also, you know, it sends off some bells in my head. So like, hey, Abby, I don't know if this is correct. Maybe you might want to ask some more questions as well. Remember, you are your expert. So there's two people in any medical appointment. There's two experts in the room. There's the doctor, who's the expert in how to treat your health. And then there's you, and you are the expert in your body. You're the only expert in your body. And each of us is so unique. So you have to be able to speak up and be knowledgeable about what is going on with my body. So pay attention to yourself. And also, I find so many times I hear about friends, family members who aren't comfortable speaking up in their doctor's appointments, right? And I don't know if it's intimidation because the doctor is, you know, has a doctor's medical degree. But we have to know that you are just as much an expert in that room as that doctor is. Yeah. So make sure that you know your body, but listen to your doctor because they are the expert in health. And always have your questions prepared before your visits. So as you do your reading, as you recognize, hey, something is wrong with this, write your questions down, write down what's going on with your body immediately, so that when you go into your doctor's appointment, you're not forgetting anything that might have happened. Yeah. And request access to your health charts. I find that as I get new doctors, sometimes I'm changing health systems. So it's so important for me to have historical records of my health, because recently I had to have a biopsy. So every time I get a new lump, my rheumatologist recommends that I have a biopsy. So I have had probably about 4 or 5 biopsies in the last couple of years. So I'm always under a knife, getting something in my face or something. And it's so frustrating. But it's also because I don't necessarily have copies of those records from before. So I've learned from that mistake. And I want to make sure that I have access to my health records. So as I go to a new doctor, if they see that there's a weird lump, they don't need to tell me to go get another biopsy to see if it's a tumor or if it's cancerous, but they would be able to see the history of every other biopsy that I've taken that showed that it's paniculitis. Yeah. So important. Ensure that your doctors are talking to each other and are communicating with each other. So last year, in 2019, I had to have eye surgery because my eye had swollen up tremendously. Again, I tied to paniculitis. So my eye doctor is working with my rheumatologist to prescribe the treatment that I'm taking for that inflammation, and they're working together. But so I have to make sure that my rheumatologist is getting the communication from my eye doctor, who primarily communicates via letter, not fax or email, but physical letters. So I have to make sure that, did you get that letter from my eye doctor? Did you check that information from this other one? So, you want to make sure that they're communicating with each other so that your treatment is really comprehensive and that all aspects are being taken into consideration.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable sharing about your disease with your leadership at work and with your family and friends, it could be so beneficial in that you're truly going to be able to build out your support network and help manage your stress. And access networks of peers is also a key piece of that self-advocacy. So for me, talking with other people who are living with lupus has provided me with additional questions that maybe I didn't think about as I was reading all those articles. That piece about information being power that I talked about as the first tip? The more you talk with people with lupus, not everyone, some people are going to give you information that is not applicable to you at all. Don't take their advice as though it's the advice of a doctor, but listen, because many times they might have tips that when you talk to your doctor might say, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do some more research and look and see how that might apply for you. So for example, I've talked to people who had lupus who said, lymphatic drainage massage was really beneficial for them. And especially for me, since I have panniculitis, getting lymphatic drainage has truly benefited me. But it's not something that I even knew about before talking to someone with an autoimmune disease. Or, someone said I've been working with a naturopath and they recommended this diet. So then I talked to my doctor and I said, what do you think about this diet? And they said, yeah, you should try that if you haven't done it before. But I had never heard about that diet before, right? So by talking with other people and peers, people with autoimmune diseases and with lupus, I've been able to hear about new things that have benefited me after I talked to my doctor. Mm-hmm. Learn how to tell your story. Keep it simple and succinct, short and simple. KISS. So telling your story in a really succinct way, whether it's to your doctor, being able to share what's happening with your body, with your family members, with your colleagues, can really be beneficial as an advocate. Or even if you're going before government to give testimony as to why our government should be investing in peer support workers or funding more for lupus, being able to tell your story in a short and simple way will truly be beneficial to you as an advocate. Mm-hmm. Stay organized. Keep your questions in advance. Make sure that you have all your files together related to your health. That's a key part. That information about your body is so important for being a self-advocate. Yeah. And give yourself grace. There's going to be some times when you don't want to advocate, and that's totally fine. We live with a disease that really drains our bodies, and it's fine if you don't want to show up on any day. If you don't want to tell anybody, hey, I'm dealing with a flare up this week or this month. If you don't want to show up on camera and talk on Instagram stories or post a picture, that's totally fine. Give yourself grace. It's a key part of retaining yourself for another day to advocate.
Wow. Thank you, Abby. Some great information there. Sharing your story has truly touched me. I think even some of the things you just touched on today, and we've talked a few times, but there's been a few things you said today that I went, wow, yeah, never thought of that. So I think there's some great tips for everybody to try and help self-advocate for themselves, how they can do it. And I think, when you ended off, give yourself grace. I think that's really important. People who are living with an autoimmune disease like lupus, remember, you know your body the best. And if you need that time, take that time, and don't let anybody sort of take that away from you. Yeah. Is there anything else? I know you've shared a whole heck of a lot, but is there anything else you'd like to leave our audience with before we go to questions?
Gosh, the one thing I'd say is that, don't underestimate the power of even sharing yourself as a resource to Lupus Canada too, right? Because I'm sure Lupus Canada is involved in either research or maybe even doing advocacy as well. So sharing yourself as, hey, if ever you need someone to share their story, I'm available, because I want to make sure that even if it doesn't benefit me, it can also benefit others who come behind me, who might be diagnosed with this disease. So I would recommend that anyone, if you are comfortable and open to sharing your story, share yourself as a resource to Lupus Canada, so that they can definitely work with you to help you craft your story, and think about how you could be an advocate, not just for yourself, but also for others.
Yeah, wonderful. That's great. Thank you. Ariana, I'll pass it over to you.
Hello, thank you so much for sharing, Abby. That was such an amazing presentation. And going off what you said about sharing your story, Lupus Canada does have an electronic newsletter that we release every month. And we try to get people to send their stories to Lupus Canada so that we can put it in our e-newsletter. So we find that it helps other people get new information, but also it goes to that advocacy again. And, this is an opportunity for people to put a spotlight on it for themselves, which we think is very important. I don't see any questions as of right now, but maybe we can wait a little bit longer. I don't know if Leanne, if there's anything else you would like to. Oh, maybe we do have.
We have a
Yeah,
question.
I saw somebody put a question.
What is one thing you wish you were told or knew upon receiving your diagnosis?
I wish I knew, one, to always wear sunscreen, but two, that so much of autoimmune diseases are tied to our gut and are triggered by inflammation that is tied to what we eat. And even though for many of us, we will still need the treatments that we are receiving from our doctors, there are ways to manage this disease that's tied to nutrition, that's tied to staying inside, or knowing when your body might react to the sun outside, etc. So there are ways to prevent flare-ups, and I wish I had someone to talk with me a little bit more about what that type of preventative maintenance could look like, that's tied to food, etc. I find that, our health system tends to be sort of like, let's put a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Sorry for my crassness, but as opposed to how do we stop the gunshot wound in the first place? How do we prevent these flare-ups in the first place? So working with a nutritionist, working with someone that's more so focused on natural health, while I also work with my general practitioner and my doctors, has been so important for me to think through other ways to just manage my health, and not just my lupus, but the other health conditions that do come along with just getting older. So that preventative piece, I wish I knew more about that when I was diagnosed.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the need for the comprehensive healthcare team. It's not just one doctor that you're usually seeing, it's a whole team. And I think as we begin to advocate for ourselves, we see that there's maybe more healthcare professionals that might be involved in our healthcare, like you mentioned, a nutritionist. And we had a webinar not that long ago from a nutritionist talking about how we should be monitoring what we're putting in our bodies and how that impacts us. Along with, you mentioned sunscreen, and I think we all tend to forget that we don't just put sunscreen on because it's summertime. It's all the time. The sun is always out there. So
in my house too. The sun is in my house. Like when the sun UV rays coming in my home too. So yeah.
Exactly. So we tend to forget that, we need to do that at all times, when we, especially when we leave the house, whether it be summer, winter, fall, spring, whatever that is. That's great. Great. Wonderful.
They just said, thank you for sharing your story with us, and great answer. Yeah, and I think going off what Leanne said, on our social media, we try to release new information every day regarding articles, updated research, any organizations that may benefit Canadians or anyone living with lupus. And people often comment saying, I actually never thought about how taking care of your skin would be of benefit, or how, you know, just monitoring your water intake or staying hydrated could help me. And so it is interesting to see how new information and new sources can open your eye to helping yourself as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The other piece I would say is there's so many resources out there. One of those is really, at least in the US, we have so many clinical trials. So I live in Washington, DC, and the National Institutes of Health is right here in Washington, DC, right? So there's a lot of research happening, but I didn't know enough about research and how to access clinical trials when I was first diagnosed. Now, I haven't done a clinical trial because I've been stalking them for a trial for lupus folliculitis, and I haven't seen one as yet. But I think, you know, for anyone living with lupus, sometimes clinical trials can have some of the best treatments and care that you could possibly get from your disease. So I just wish there was more information about clinical trials for people with lupus from the time they're diagnosed, because I think that could really be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And at Lupus Canada, that is something we're really striving toward, to be able to have that comprehensive information around clinical trials and how people can participate. So that, like you said, there is some good treatments that come from that. So we're really working towards that, in ensuring that we have as much information around that as possible for folks that want to participate.
Yeah. And lastly, rest. Get yourself 8 hours of sleep, 7 or 8 hours of sleep every night, because it is so important for your body, especially as you get older. But nobody tells us that. Like, I mean, people say that, like your mom used to say that. My mom used to tell me that when I was a child, like, go in your bed. There's a reason why you're getting 8 hours sleep. But I think, you know, our society teaches us that it's this grind culture, right? We're always working to try to pay bills. And sleep is so important for us to be productive even. And sleep is so important for our bodies as people living with autoimmune diseases. So I feel like nobody in my medical team has ever told me that I need to sleep. And I think we could all be part of sleep studies and realize that we're not getting enough to truly replenish our bodies and make sure that we're living healthily. So yeah.
And the routine behind the sleep, you know, and how you lead up to your sleep is important. And I think we touched on that in some previous webinars about how to prepare for sleep. We don't think about that. We think, oh, we're going to have our phones in our hand. We're going to put it down and think we're going to go to sleep. That's not going to happen. So we need to prepare our body for that.
As we're talking, I'm thinking of so many more things that I wish I knew from the beginning. I'm sorry. I keep thinking of more. But the other thing I wish I knew was, you know, that living with a chronic autoimmune disease could be a bit traumatic, you know, like I remember when I had to have eye surgery, and, you know, the number of times that my doctors have told me, you know, you might have cancer, like you need to do a biopsy. So I had to have a biopsy on my eye where they, you know, cut into my lid, went into my eye, you know, it was a lot. But there's trauma behind that, and making sure that you have people who you could talk with and process through that trauma is important for our mental health. And I know you all had a mental health webinar as well. But constantly living with this disease, not being certain about what's coming next or what's happening the next day, could really be traumatic. And the importance of connecting with either a mental health provider or making sure that you have the people around you to support you through those sometimes really tough times is something that I wish I had thought of when I was first diagnosed or was told. The importance of having that support network.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And keeping those lines of communication open. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I think also we have, we'll also post, I think on your, you'll have some information in regards to if people want to contact you or follow you on Instagram. I think we will be sharing this presentation on our website. So for folks that want that information, we will have that up within the next 24 to 48 hours, along with a copy of this recording so that people can watch it back at their leisure. and revisit some of the very important topics that Abby has touched on that I think are really huge benefit for everybody. And for those who are watching, it's also important to have your family members watch these webinars so they can learn a little bit more about what you're going through. Something they can do at their leisure as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions or wants to email me at any point in time, I am a resource. So feel free to email me at abby.charles@gmail.com, or you can send me a DM at Instagram as well. I'm Abby Ria Charles on Instagram.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Abby. Thank you for
Thank
taking
you,
the time this
Abby.
evening. I know you're a
Thanks
very busy
all.
person, and we really appreciate you sharing your story with everyone.
Yeah, I appreciate you all having me. And like I said, self-advocacy, this is a part of that process, building the network. So now I have Lupus Canada as a website and a resource that I could go to on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
You all will hear much more from me.
That's what we're here for. We love that. And to anybody else who has some topics that they would love us to address in future webinars, please send us an email at info@lupuscanada.org, or reach out to us if you have any further questions about any of the webinars we've already posted. And I guess we'll end it there, and thank you everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.